Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the Member for Leeds East, for securing this important debate, and I echo his call for an annual debate in this place. And it's great to see Emma Dentcourt in the gallery listening to this debate today, and it's good to be in a debate with the honourable member for Kensington. I think we all remember that awful morning 5 years ago in June. I know I felt physically sick when I watched Grenfell Tower burn. And whenever I see images of that charred building, I can't help but think about the innocent children, women and men who died that night and the panic that they must have felt, realising that they wouldn't survive. And my thoughts, and I'm sure those of everyone in Durham, are with the 72 people who died and their loved ones, now and always. The Grenfell fire didn't just take lives, it tore a warm and loving community apart. And it's to the immense credit of the survivors and local residents that they've found the strength to rally together to fight to ensure that lessons are learned and that justice is done. And they have my complete solidarity. And before I move on, I'd also like to pay tribute to the heroic efforts of the firefighters and emergency responders who worked tirelessly that night. And I'll never forget the image of exhausted firefighters slumped outside the tower as they gathered their energy once more. Firefighters regularly risk their lives for our safety, and we should never forget their service. Mr Deputy Speaker, we shouldn't forget that those who died in Grenfell that night were primarily minorities, asylum seekers, migrants, the disabled and the poor. These are the people that our society values the least. And for the residents in Grenfell, the value placed on their safety was nowhere near enough. And the leadership of Kensington and Chelsea Council, at the time the richest borough in the country with hundreds of millions of pounds in reserves, chose to use combustible cladding because it was marginally cheaper than the safer alternative. And when concerns were repeatedly raised by residents that the building was unsafe in the weeks leading up to the fire, they were ignored. As Grenfell resident Lee Chapman told the inquiry, as residents in a so-called social housing block, we were treated as sub-citizens. And in 2019, my right honourable friend, the member for Islington North, said that the Grenfell Tower wouldn't have happened to wealthy Londoners. It happened to poor and mainly migrant Londoners. And sadly, he was right. And what upsets me the most about the Grenfell fire is that it was all so sickeningly avoidable. 72 people didn't lose their lives because of a faulty fridge. They died because those in positions of power were more committed to austerity, to deregulation, to privatisation than they were to ensuring that human beings were safe. And they did because certain companies were motivated by greed over decency. And I despaired as I read how a building that was home to so many people came to be wrapped in a material that manufacturers knew was highly flammable. And I was disgusted to learn that private contractors celebrated when corners were cut and that money was saved. It's staggering how many times fire building safety regulations have been watered down and stripped away by governments in the name of removing red tape and reducing burdens on businesses, while key processes to regulate and inspect fire and building safety have been privatised, lowering standards and weakening precious protections. And since 2010, as the Fire Brigades Union has pointed out, the slavish commitment of a Conservative government to pursue austerity at whatever cost has seen a staggering 20% of frontline firefighter jobs lost, including at least a quarter of the fire inspectors. And listening to this, can anyone honestly say that the path of deregulation, privatisation and austerity has made society safer? But what's most troubling of all is that 5 years after 72 people died as a result of corporate greed and institutional failure, so little has changed. So far, no one's been prosecuted. Safety regulations are still inadequate, and less than 1% of buildings have had their dangerous cladding removed. Like many in this House, I anxiously await the full findings of the inquiry and the outcome of the ongoing criminal investigations. However, until these inquiries are complete, the response to the Grenfell Tower tragedy is defined by a few powerful numbers. 5 years, 72 dead, 0 convictions. A reminder that we can never stop fighting for justice.